Hi, welcome to Narkis Bible Study for April 24th, Shabbat. And we are looking at the rich fool, parable in Luke. We're going to be looking at chapter 12. It's a small little section, verse 13 until 21. And we're going to break down some of the ideas in it and then put it all back together. Maybe we'll read it through one time and then we'll go back and break it in parts. Does anyone want to read it for us?
Yeah, I can read it.
Sure.
I can read it. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God." Amen.
All right. Yes, amen indeed. Thank you. There's so many good little bits in there. And we want to, obviously, the goal of the parable, we can all readily understand, but we want to look at some of the details and maybe, as you mull over these words and concepts, it becomes that much richer for you, or at least for me. So I'm just going to start with the context. Verse 13 opens that someone in the crowd says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And so that's an interesting question, right? So some random guy, this is not one of the disciples, just one of the crowd, and they're approaching Jesus and they're calling him teacher, so they recognize that he is a distinguished rabbi. And I guess they're acknowledging he has authority here. And it's very interesting, Jesus' response to him. When I read it, I'll ask you, I know it jumped out to me. When he says, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator between you?" Let me just ask briefly, does that trigger anybody's memory from the Bible? Any other passage in the Bible?
Maybe Moses?
Yeah.
Shlomo.
Sorry, what was the second thing I heard?
I was not muted. What about Shlomo with the two women that approached him?
Yeah, Shlomo, we have many judges, right? But
Okay.
How about Micah 6:8? He has told you, oh man, what is good.
well, okay, so that's the "oh man" you're referring to?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have a lot of like if you just look at any one of these words, maybe there could be a lot of context. To call out to someone, "Hey person, hey guy," that was kind of, I would say, normal. Just like even in Hebrew, you refer to someone, you say Ben Adam, a son of Adam, some son of Adam. That's just a somebody. So in Greek, we have the anthrope here. Hey, person. But the rhetorical question asking, who made me judge and arbitrator between you? I would go, what Richard said is what popped in my mind from Exodus 2:14. Yeah. And you remember Moses, this is right after Moses kills an Egyptian was abusing an Israelite. And so Moses looks around, sees no one's noticing, he kills the Egyptian. But then the next day, according to the text, there are two Israelites in an argument. and then he tries to get the guy who is in the wrong to give in to the guy who's in the right. And so that person answers and he says, who made you a person to be a minister and a judge over us? So they use the same word judge, a different, like sar is like a prince or a kind of a high up person. Today it's used a minister in the government. So mi samcha leish sar v'shofet alenu. So it's the same rhetorical question. The interesting thing is when Jesus says this, I mean, it like just reminds me of an inverted quote from Exodus 2:14, but a completely different context. The original, this is the bad guy talking, and here this is Jesus. And Jesus can be quite a bit more picante in the way he talks than I think a lot of people want him to be.
Could you say that? Could you say that Jesus impersonalizes Moses, and this thing is already said about him, so he eternalizes that concept, and that's his point of view.
Yes, so clearly, I think he is clearly quoting this place because it's too similar not to be quoting. And the question is why? He could be, I think what I'm understanding you to say is it's like it's a way of hinting at who his true nature is. Because if Moses was this judge over people, how much more Jesus kind of thing. So when he says, who made me judge or arbitrator, he can also be saying, I don't have anything to do with this. But he could also be alluding to, well, at least you recognize I have authority. I am, in the position, actually above the position of Moses. So that could be a subtle play there. And it just makes you pause and kind of think over it, because you can see the connection, but then you have to think like, well, why was he making that connection?
Could this be a reason why some people thought he was Moses in another passage? When Jesus says, who do the people say I am?
Yeah.
Some people say Moses, maybe because of this side.
Okay. Sure. I mean, Moses, when you study Moses in Second Temple times, it's very different than maybe some people realize. He is aggrandized. He's made this big, huge, almost divine figure. I mean, you have the Deuteronomy passage in, is it chapter 18, where he says, a prophet like me will arise. And if you interpret that messianically or whatever, that connection with like a second Moses, there will be someone in the future who's going to be a prophet like me. And so they're looking forward to this Moses figure. And Jesus does allude to that. And you have works like the Ascension of Moses, where there's a tradition that Moses ascended into heaven, when he was fasting 40 days in the mountain. And so you have all these allusions to like this greater, larger than life being.
It wasn't an unreasonable request of Jesus, because rabbis did arbitrate in disputes, didn't they? So it wasn't unreasonable.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a rhetorical question. He isn't saying who really made me. He's kind of like, well, why are you coming to me about it? But you're right that people did go to rabbi, and it could be similar to when he says, what's the passage? I didn't write it down. Good teacher. He's like, why'd you call me good? Only God is good. And, if you're a cynic, you could say, hey, Jesus is claiming to not be divine. Or you could say he's trying to force them to see that he's divine, like using their own words. And so, yeah, so it could be something like that.
But isn't this also just a civil suit? It's a civil-like thing, and you had a whole group of kind of judges in those times who knew the law in the civil sense in that society, and Jesus was really about the spiritual.
Yeah. So he can do both at the same time, though, with a rhetorical statement like this. He could be both affirming, like, yeah, you've recognized my authority, you've recognized my identity, but really, I have nothing to do with that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm here for. And then he uses it, as he often does, as a jumping board to go into a topic that is important. So he takes the practical question and then flips it. So in his response, then he said to them, "Watch out and guard yourself from all types of greed, because one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." So I want to stop also and just think about what we don't have the backstory of the man, but what was he asking arbitration over? He wants Jesus to tell his brother to split the inheritance with him. So,
which is legit, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's legit.
Well, depending on the context, right? So if we take the firstborn, where did I write my notes down? Hold on. Okay, so Deuteronomy 21:15, is that where I'm going? Deuteronomy 21:15. You have this little law. Suppose a man has two wives, one whom he loves more than the other. Or if you have old translations, it might say one whom he loves, one whom he hates. And this is one of the idiomatic usages of love and hate, is one is preferred over the other. And they both bear him sons, with the firstborn being the child of the less loved wife, or the non-preferred wife. In the day he divides his inheritance, he must not appoint as firstborn the son of the favorite wife in place of the other wife's son, who is actually the firstborn. Rather, he must acknowledge the son of the less loved wife as firstborn and give him the double portion of all he has. For that son is the beginning of his father's proactive power. To him should go the right of the firstborn. So this is interesting. So there is this concept that the firstborn gets a double portion. That's considered the fair thing. And so it doesn't matter if you're the firstborn, it doesn't matter which wife you're from, firstborn is firstborn, and therefore you should get double portion. So here we have this concept that one of the kids, the firstborn son will get a double portion. So I read into this context in Luke that the brother coming to Jesus must not have been a firstborn, and he must be asking Jesus for the firstborn to split his portion with him. Otherwise, the other kids would get an equal portion. So what would there be to argue about? Like, you'd all have an equal portion. So I'm assuming it's not enough for him, the portion he got. Maybe there was just two of them. And so his brother got double and he wants some too. And so,
or maybe he, the firstborn, didn't split it all and kept all for himself, and there still has to be divided.
Yeah, well, if he took it all, I think that would be a clear trespass, right? He's going against the law. It would have to. I'm imagining it would need to be something gray for the other brother to dispute about it, or to come try to get some help. And
then that he's asking Jesus to override the rule, overrule the law.
Right. Unless you say maybe there was, it's more of a practical thing. Like, yeah, he's acknowledging the brother gets a double portion, but what does that practically work out to be? And like he disagrees with however the practical implications have worked out. I don't know. But in Jesus' response, he clearly is moving away from the detail of the argument and trying to go to the root motive. And so he says, guard yourself from all types of greed.
One other thing to go along with the wisdom idea, when Jesus says, who appointed me judge in your situation, is Proverbs 26:17. Like one who grabs a stray dog by the ears is someone who rushes into a quarrel not their own. And unless Jesus, is in an official sense, they're part of his group, or it's kind of,
Not his place, he's saying.
yeah, it's not his place necessarily. And so if he gives his opinion, he doesn't even know who these brothers are. It's
Right.
not so wise.
Right.
So that's important when it comes to getting to the root.
Right.
I mean, whether he's a firstborn, whether he's arguing he should have more, or whether the firstborn has taken an unfair amount or whatever it is, we don't know.
We don't know.
But the wisdom is, who's there for me to arbitrate? But the issue is who's being greedy and what
Right.
is greed.
So from the rest of the passage, I would say that it seems to be Jesus is interpreting that this brother is trying to get more than he deserves.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that. You can have wrong motives even if you're fighting for what you deserve. But let's look at what he says. He says, guard yourself from all types of greed. And he uses the word pleonexia, which is a great word. It's definitely greed. And it can be more than greed, and it often comes all types of. So it's not just one thing. Maybe greed is a summary. It can be lust. It can be, covetousness, when you're kind of jealous. Where greed I would define as you just want more. You have no satisfaction. Where covetousness, you don't just want more, you want more of what someone else has. And then in some contexts, it could just be an advantage. You're trying to get an advantage over someone else. And
or maybe you want more where you're entitled to, because Jesus talks about greed.
And what I like about it, when you pause to think about all the different types of greed that are out there, just the fact that Jesus says, watch out and guard yourself. In Hebrew, I don't know if he would have said what the first verb he would have used, re'u, or the second one I'd say hishameru lecha, or hishameru lachem.
I noticed, Sharon, that it's exactly the same. I don't know if it's the same in the Greek as 12, the beginning of 12, be on your guard against the chametz of the Pharisees. It's the same word I've got, be on your guard, be on your guard.
Yeah, that could be.
Which is like sort of watch out, is it?
Yeah, watch out.
I've got watch out, be on your guard. It's very strong.
It's double. It's watch out, be on your guard.
Yeah.
And so what that tells us is that greed, all these types of greed are not obvious. Because if it was obvious, we wouldn't have to watch out for it if it was so apparent. And so when we're called watch out, be on guard, really Jesus is saying, like, this is a really subtle thing, and it has a big implication. It has a big impact on you. And so you need to be very careful of it. And
when you look at the example he gives, they're reasonable things. When you say
right.
It's not
so we're going to get to that.
Yeah. So when it's not obvious, they are things which you're normally entitled to, and nobody would shame you about it. And to collect things where you're entitled to can lead to greed. Right.
Because it's going to go back very much to attitude and motivation. That's kind of the key here. So one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And so he gives us this wisdom line, right? One's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And that ties into a lot of Jesus' sayings where, is not life more than the body? Like, why are you worrying about what you're going to eat or drink, or all these things that the pagans run after? Isn't very life itself more important? And here, like, the most important thing, your life really isn't about the abundance of your possessions. And this key theme of one's life you could say later on, we're going to see your soul, your being. He's going to come back to that and flip it. Like, what is life? And where does it come from? And what is the point? So now he tells his parable. And we have this situation where we know there's this rich man and he's got land and it produces this amazing, abundant crop. And so now he has this question he asks himself, or he thinks to himself, what should I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. Okay, so far so good. That's a good question. You see, you have a lot more than you expected, right? And so now you have to think what you're going to do with it. And so this is where it gets subtle. Because what would you do? Let's say you were given 20,000 pounds out of the blue. It was unexpected. You ask yourself, oh, I have extra money here. What should I do with it? And so he's thinking this through, and he says to himself, I will do this. I will destroy my barn and build a bigger one. Or no, sorry, barns. He's got barns because he's rich. So that's a key. We know he's rich. We know he has a lot. And so he's going to tear them down and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I noticed the goods there. I've never thought about this before, but it literally says my good in Greek, like agatha. And I thought, well, I wonder if that saying in English is actually is a idiom we got through the Bible. Like, why do we call our stuff, our things, our goods? But obviously the things we have are either neutral or good, or we wouldn't have them, we'd get rid of them. So he's storing all his stuff. And so we know, or we're given a clue already, that was not the right response. What should have the response been?
He should have shared his excess with others.
Yeah, should have thought, oh, who should I give this to? Because I don't need it. I can't fit it in my barn. And so that should have been the immediate thought. But he goes on. So first he stores it. So that's like the very conservative, and maybe that's how he got rich. I don't know. And then he continues, and I will say to myself, and here it's nice because we have a little Hebrew idiom. I'll say to my soul. This is how you talk in biblical Hebrew. You can either you speak in your heart or you speak in your soul or to your soul. It's like self-talk inside your head. But it's nice to mention the soul because we're going to get the soul again later on down. So he says to his soul, you have plenty of goods stored up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, celebrate. Kind of like basically go into early retirement. You know, you're pretty good here. You've got it all saved up. You're good to go. You have nothing more to worry about. You can just sit down and relax. So on the one hand, that's not an evil thing. You know, it's not an evil thing to have enough. And it's not an evil thing. We see Jesus relaxing with people. We see Jesus eating and drinking and celebrating. None of those things are bad things. But talking to yourself and focusing on your own stuff is the bad part of it. But then God turns to him and says, you fool, this very night your life, which is literally your soul, will be asked back from you. But who will get what you have prepared for yourself? So first we have this fool concept, which again is wisdom. I mean, this whole parable, you could say, is wisdom oriented, where you have wise and foolish. And the foolish isn't necessarily stupid. The fool is a moral thing where he refuses to acknowledge God most of the time, and he refuses to follow in God's way. And so God here is calling this rich man who's focused on himself a fool. This very night, your soul will be demanded back from you. But who will get what you have prepared yourself? So as we're following the links of soul, life, what is life about? I think that is a key to this passage, because we were told earlier, one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So it makes you think like, well, what does it consist in? Why am I alive? How am I alive? And this key here, when it says it's going to be asked from you, your soul is going to be asked from you, it basically implies that you were borrowing it, you were given it, you were stewarding it. It's not yours. Even your life was given to you. And so there's a lot in there as I think about it. If you come at life with that perspective, even my very life, being alive, was given to me. I can't own it. It was given to me, and it will one day be taken from me, and it's more or less outside of my control. Even that I don't own, and that is a product of a generous God. And so if that is the perspective, then how much more should we be willing to give of what was given to us? So this life that we're temporarily given, what do we do with it? Any talent you may have, or any possession you may have, like you approach that with a sense of, well, what am I doing with it to bless people, or to make good in this world? And it's not like you don't come with a sense of ownership where you take your life for granted, and you take kind of blessing, anything that comes in is just kind of like, oh, well, I'll just keep adding that in, and isn't that great, I get this and this and this.
When you look at the Torah, the principle is that you share the burden together, that you take care of each other in family form.
Yeah.
And that there is not absolute capitalism, not absolute materialism, because after 70 years, everything goes back to the owner. So possession is relative, and it's within a social bondage, and it's under the coverage of the fear of the Lord. Love the Lord above all, and love your neighbor as because he's like you, or as yourself. So when you just said that he's a fool, I thought of he lacks the fear of the Lord and the whole concept of the Torah about these things. So that everything fits together.
Yeah. And I think if you look at many of Jesus' teachings, you see this theme really, that everything we have comes from God anyway. And the faster we acknowledge that and focus on that, the more we are going to start acting like children of God and being in the kingdom of God, because we can freely give, because we know we've freely received. We know we've received everything. And so whatever it is we have, we don't have to hold back, because we trust the person who gave it to us in the first place. Like kids, like, you're not in control. I want to look at the last little line there too. So it is with the one who stores up riches for himself, but is not rich toward God. And so this orientation, being rich toward God, I would define as having that attitude where my life is actually borrowed, and it's from God and it's for God. And so everything I do should be in context of that. Everything I do should be an expression of that. And as I was looking at greed, I was thinking, in this context, we have the initial warning, beware of all kinds of greed, and then this parable, and it ending with this dichotomy between storing up riches here, storing up possessions, which would tie into the greed, or being rich toward God. And so that, of course, can evoke a lot of passages, but I thought we could just read several of them. Maybe in Colossians 3:5. I'll put up. Colossians 3:5.
You want me to read it?
Okay.
Therefore, put to death what is earthly in you. Is this it?
Mhm.
Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, and greed, for that is idolatry.
Mhm.
Because of such things, God's wrath is coming upon the sons of disobedience.
Right.
At
So-
one time, you also walked in these ways when you used to live, but now set them all aside. It sort of goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, it goes on and on. So let's back up. The context here is that, therefore, if you've been raised with Christ, keep seeking the things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Keep thinking about things above, not things on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you too will be revealed in glory with him. So it's this concept again of your life is not your own anyway. And the faster you understand that, the faster we can get on to what's really important. But we have a part in trying to understand that, playing it out. So put to death whatever in your nature belongs to the earth. And so then it gives you that nice big long list. And of course, these are the big bad mixed in with everything you can, sexual immorality, impurity, shameful passion, evil desire. And then you have and greed. And this is the same greed word, pleonexia. And then it gives you a little definition right there, which is idolatry. So that to me is very powerful, because you think, okay, greed is idolatry. And it leads us back to our passage where, you're rich in this thing, but not rich towards God. So there's this dichotomy. And, how is greed idolatry? Because idolatry is either worshiping God in a manner that he said not to, unfitting way, or it's worshiping a foreign God or something that's not God.
Isn't that what it says somewhere? The love of money is the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
Money itself is not evil. It's the love
Right.
of money, which is idolatry.
Which is, and it's actually even more than just the love of money. It's greed itself, which is wanting more
than you've got anyway.
And I would say that greed piggybacks off of a bad concept of God, because when you want more and more, you're really not acknowledging that there's a good God who is perfectly capable of giving you what you need at the right time. And so it's like trying to get it and, amass stuff for yourself. Now I was thinking it's a very, very ingrained human. I mean, I know as adults, we all like to think we're not greedy, but, I watch my kids, and, if I make something like cinnamon rolls, something special, their first impulse is to try to grab as much as they can, make sure they get some and they get enough and they get just as big as somebody else. It's not the impulse of like, oh, well, maybe I'll have one. That's nice. Or has everybody else had one? Those are things we teach our kids to do, but it doesn't come naturally. Naturally it comes to just grab a good thing and try to get more and more, and maybe take from someone else as well.
Sharon, what you said just now is crucial, because you said it stems from a poor concept of God. Yep. The idea that God not only can and will give us what we need, he will give us over and abundantly what we need. Not always what we want exactly, but he certainly gives us what we need. And I think this idea of the bad concept of God being a root is crucial.
Yeah.
But there's also the literal form, in the sense that the New Testament speaks about the mammon, the god of money. So that is a deformation of the image of God.
Right. Yeah. The other passage I want to look at is in 2 Peter 2, and he's coming against false prophets or false teachers that are among the believers. And he has some pretty strong words against them. And of course, they're living in a day just like our day, where there's all kinds of theories going around what matters. And, a Gnostic theory is basically, everything human doesn't matter. And therefore, because it doesn't matter, or it's bad anyway, you can just indulge in any kind of passion you want, and who cares, kind of thing. So this world, the early believers are definitely in a world where they have to consistently clean out those kind of wrong ideas. And so 2 Peter is addressing that. And he starts off, let's see, should I start from, let's see.
Well, it starts in the beginning, so that through you may become partakers of the divine nature, that you have escaped the corruption that evil desires have brought into the world.
So let's go to verse 10. Brazen and insolent, they are not afraid to insult the glorious ones. Yet even angels, who are much more powerful, do not bring a slanderous judgment against them in the presence of the Lord. But these men, this is referring to these false teachers again, like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, do not understand whom they are insulting. And consequently, in their destruction, they will be destroyed, suffering harm as the wages for their harmful ways. By considering it a pleasure to carouse in broad daylight, they are stains and blemishes, indulging in their deceitful pleasures when they feast together with you. Their eyes, full of adultery, never stop sinning. They entice unstable people. They have trained their hearts for greed, these cursed children. And so by forsaking the right path, they have gone astray because they followed the way of Bil'am, son of Bosor. I don't know why Bosor, they're not Be'or. It should be Be'or. And of course, this is, you remember the story in the Torah of Bil'am, who is this prophet that comes from the east, from Aram. And he comes to put a curse on Israel, and he's not able to curse them. And he doesn't want to come in the first place. But if you read between the lines, eventually he's persuaded. And in later interpretation, it's understood that the way he's persuaded is to be promised more and more money. And so here we have this idea that Bil'am, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, and I would call that maybe betza in Hebrew, or unjust gain, like anything where you've gotten money in a bad way. And it's usually, there usually is an implication of too much money, or there's a greediness in there too.
I've got a footnote, I don't know if other people have it, that I've got Balaam the son of Beor, and then you said that it's literally Bosor in the Greek, presumably, perhaps a word play, basar meaning flesh.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Maybe. Yeah. There are several variants, but a lot of the good manuscripts have Bosor. So I don't know why, unless you want to say that if he's playing with it on purpose. But then why wouldn't he have just said basar? But maybe he did, and the Greeks just transliterated funny.
So what have you got? You've got Besor.
Bosor.
I've got Beor.
Beor is in the Hebrew Bible. The second Peter in many good manuscripts says Bosor. There are some manuscripts that say Beor, but then the question is, did they correct it on the basis of the Numbers passage or not?
Anyways. Yeah.
But never mind. Bilam is known in Second Temple Judaism for loving Betza, loving unjust gain. And that was what brought him down. Or here they call it love the wages of unrighteousness. So you have this context again of greed. After all these things that they're going about these bad people, they have trained their hearts for greed, these cursed children. And so I was thinking about that because it literally says they have trained their hearts. So gymna, you hear gymnasium, like, to train, to work out, to exercise, to practice. They have trained their hearts for greed. So it's like, it's a practice. It's something that you work out and you build up a certain thing. And so I was thinking about that image, to train your heart for greed as the opposite of what you should be training your heart for. And so back to our passage, basically, Jesus is asking someone to do the opposite. Train your heart against greed. And I like juxtaposing these two passages, because you see, like, if you already know it's subtle, you see that it's something that you have to kind of teach yourself and work at, and beginning when you're a kid, and you have to stop yourself and not take the last cinnamon roll and see if everyone's gotten it. Like you train your heart to not be greedy. Let me go back to the Luke. And so reading this parable, one of the clear ways to do that is simply don't focus on yourself. Obviously, parables, you can't stretch them for every situation in life, and you have to take a shower and do stuff and take care of yourself, but your focus doesn't have to be there. And what your motives and what you're shooting for isn't there. So, like, this, I find this very challenging, because a lot of times, you can read a biblical passage and just assume, well, oh yeah, that's talking to all those other people out there who are really greedy, but I'm okay. I'm just kind of like the normal person. But again, like I said, what is your first thought when you get a gift of money from someone? And is your first thought like, oh, how am I meant to use this money? God blessed me for a reason. What was it for? What am I supposed to do with this? And I'm not presuming that I would know. You just that attitude, and to pray about it and ask. I think that's the important part. And it kind of reminded me of also the Joseph story, where Joseph, he has these prophetic dreams that Pharaoh gets that he is able to decipher for him. But part of that was storing up good things, because you knew that there was a hard time coming. So there was this attitude of like, why has God given this extra blessing? It's intended for a purpose. And so let's try to figure out what that is. And in the case of Egypt, the purpose was to save many people from starvation in the coming years when there wasn't going to be enough. And had they been like this rich fool, they would have said, hey, now we can all quit working. We'll just relax and eat and drink and just live off the bonus crop. And then they would never have survived the 7 years to come. So that's what I take out of it, just a reorienting. Okay, so then that ties back into when you're asking yourself the question, why have I been given this? Kind of like, how can I use it for good? If I find this unexpected blessing,
So
how can I then bless somebody else? It ties back into the same concept of my own life was given to me. How can I use it? You know, back to the parable of the talents.
So what you're saying in the case of Joseph, he actually builds up barns in order to help people to store it.
Yeah. So yeah, because building a barn and storing it isn't in itself a bad thing. The question is, what is motivating, and what is your goal with it? What is your focus? And have you asked yourself that initial question of, why did God give this to me? What should I be doing with it? And it not just, maybe not just money, but everything, like I say, your life yourself.
Whenever I read this story, I always, and I mean, I'm actually not guilty of this, but I get really upset with people who go on renting storage space and putting stuff that they can't use and don't want, and maybe is some incredible value, and it just goes on, and they're paying huge amounts of renting for stuff that they can't use and they won't give away, or I don't know what it is, but it seems to be an absolute mania that people have to put stuff in store, even though it's, it's the chair that my grandfather sat on and it's falling to pieces and we can't let it go. And we've got to pay thousands of dollars a week just to keep the thing in store. And it goes on like that.
Right.
And I always...
That can be a mania, and that maybe is a bit more of a bondage. I mean, you reap the consequences of that yourself. You have a headache of having to pay money and figuring out how to store it. And then what happens, like this guy, once you die, once your life is taken back from you.
And what happens when the rain gets in and it all gets damaged and you've got no recompense on that either?
Or worse, what happens when your kids have to deal with all your junk?
Yeah.
Then it's not so much of a blessing anymore.
When you have no kids and somebody else is going to have to deal with
somebody else
has to deal with it.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think that this is kind of a parable to refresh our way of thinking, and again, it's subtle, so it can be on many levels, and it's something to keep coming back to. I don't think it's something that we can just toss away and say, well, I don't struggle with that. I don't do that. I think we all do, and I think it's a human tendency we kind of have to fight against.
I wanted to go back, Sharon. Gary was saying, that there's a wisdom motive that's always running through, and it comes out with "you fool" to your night. And what is this fool? And I can't find it. But in Proverbs, which I read passionately, there's time after time it talks about being a fool, and it is to do with one's relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? And I think we somehow we're going to have to find these full verses, because I don't know why I can't find them.
And was it Richard, whoever tied into the fear of the Lord? That's also motif. Like the opposite of being a fool is to fear the Lord, which is basically just to remember that the Lord exists and he's watching, and he does see, and he is just, and he will, he is in control ultimately, and he will judge people. And then the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Like, so you act as if, none of that matters.
Proverbs 17:16.
Very good.
Has, why should fools have money in hand to buy wisdom when they are not able to understand it? And so in effect, money is there to be used wisely, but if you, like you're saying, if you are not moral, you don't have the character of serving others or looking out to see what God wants you to do with that money, it's a waste to have it in a fool's hand.
It's interesting because it says in my version is what use is money in the hand of a fool, since he has no intention of acquiring wisdom. So it's putting wisdom, and it's in
So saying money without wisdom is pointless.
Yeah.
Or bad.
Right.
Another proverb that might link is Proverbs 3:9-10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of your produce.
Oh, very
Then
good.
your
Well done.
barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. So there, it's a positive of filling the barns, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of like the Deuteronomic principle where when you honor God, you'll be blessed. Which in general you can say there's truth there, but the problem would come is if you see someone who is poor and say, oh, then he's not honoring God because he's not blessed. You can't make it a strict formula. But our parable talks about this guy. He's already rich. So I don't know, maybe he already thought he was blessed of God, but he already had full barns. And so the question is, what do you do when you have even more than that? And does anybody really know that they're rich? I find this interesting too, because most what I would call rich people don't
Never
know
have
they're
enough.
rich because they're always looking at the people who are richer than them, not the people who aren't as rich as them. And so it's very fascinating because, again, it just exemplifies this, how nobody's ever satisfied. Nobody ever realizes that they have enough. And so are we the kind of person that can recognize that our barns are full? Are we willing to say, yeah, I already have enough. This part I can give to someone else, or I can, find a better use for it because I don't need it. Or like Gemma, you were saying with stuff, if you already have 6 chairs, you don't need another chair. Let's say, I'm just random examples. You can give it away. And it's recognizing that you have enough, recognizing that you're satisfied.
It's interesting in the Marcia quoted Proverbs 3:9-10. It actually says, then your barns will be filled with plenty, your vats will overflow with new wine. And it does imply, it may not be spell it out, but it implies that if it's overflowing, you're actually giving it away to other people. You're not hoarding it and saying, I'm going to keep this until
right. Well, we hope that's what it implies.
Hmm?
Yeah, we hope that's what it implies.
Well, I hope it does. But there is another one in Proverbs, and I can't see it right now, which actually talks about people who moan that they haven't got enough when they have.
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah, that's what I would say. This is a very subtle concept because I think we're all guilty of this.
Yeah.
And certainly all of us that live in the West, and what we consider just normal and satisfactory is actually a level way above what many people in the world live in.
Just on a practical whatever. I had to pay out some money the other day for somebody to do some thinking. And I then wrote to Liz, thank God he's just been and he's done the thing, and it cost me 800 shekels and now I'm skint. And that's a lie. I wrote to Liz and said that, and I suddenly thought afterwards, why do I say that? Okay, I hadn't got an awful lot of ready cash available after paying it. But to say I'm skint or I'm broke or whatever I said is just, it's not true. And I think we're not ready. It's very easy to say you spent something out, or you bought this, or you paid such and such a bill, and that's it, But praise God, mercifully, most of us, it's not true.
Yeah.
By the way, the Marcia quoted from Proverbs 3, you could link that one back to Deuteronomy 28, which you were talking about, Sharon. Deuteronomy 28, verse 8, talks about the barns being blessed when you obey God.
28:8.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, it's the phrase "blessed to be a blessing." It's people quote it a lot, maybe glibly, but the concept there is true, that when we receive a blessing, we can freely give it. We can freely pass on blessing because we received it freely. And kind of this concept of being childlike in that sense, where not in the sense of greedy for another cinnamon roll, but childlike in the sense of trusting in the moment. Like kids, they just expect that dinner time, there's just going to be dinner ready. They don't worry about it all day long. They just kind of, oh, it's dinner time. Where's food? And there's something good there where you're just, you hold things lightly with an open palm. It comes in, it goes out. And it's when you try to hold on too tight to everything that you actually destroy it, because you can't hold on to anything anyway. And trying to doesn't help. But if you can, enjoy it, be satisfied, and then freely pass on, I think that's the goal.
I wonder if Ecclesiastes 5 is the background for this parable. Did you see that?
Where the drink and be merry?
No, just Ecclesiastes 5:8. It says, if you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, don't be surprised. There's officials looking down from higher ones. And then, the increase of the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is
will never be satisfied with money. Yeah, he who loves wealth will never be satisfied with his income.
As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them?
Yeah, it's true.
The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep.
Yeah.
You mean you've got so much money that you stay up all night worrying about not having enough?
Or what to do with it, or where to put it.
And really, I mean, again, we are all in this category he's talking about. Because the person we're contrasted with is the person who's a laborer and working hard all day and just happy to be able to sleep, maybe not even eating enough that night for dinner. Like, that's a totally different perspective. And then it's almost like the more you have, the harder it is for you to enjoy life, the harder it is for you to be satisfied. Where somebody who has next to nothing, the little good that they get is just so much more pleasant.
Look at 13, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners. And so it's makes me think of the barns there. Mm-hmm. Or wealth lost through some misfortune. So the guy dies, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. And so that brings me back to the two brothers arguing with Jesus about the inheritance. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. And that's going back to Job, which is also wisdom literature. They take nothing from their toil so that they can carry in their hands, which, the fool, he dies, he takes nothing with him. And then in verse 19, moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, that's the same word there in the Greek that Jesus used about the possessions, and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil. This is a
Hey, I've lost you. Where are you? 5 what?
5:19.
For he will not often consider the days of his life, since God keeps him occupied with the joy of his heart, is what I've got.
That's verse 20.
Oh, it's 19 in my Bible. I haven't got a 20. Oh, I see. So I've got, it's 5:18 in mine. Additionally, everyone to whom God has given riches and wealth and empowers him to eat from it, to receive his share and to rejoice in his labor. This is a gift from God. That's what you've just read. Right.
The enjoyment of what your possessions are is a gift of God, no matter what size it is. Mm-hmm. It's only God can give that enjoyment. Anyway, it's just interesting reading that whole chapter in context. It really makes me think of the rich fool parable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely.
So in the Ecclesiastes thing, I see it is, it's God who gives his gift is to rejoice in his labor, as well as whatever riches and wealth he gets. It's everything.
Mhm.
For this is his reward.
Well, and
He's
to
given
take-
riches and wealth, empowers him to eat from it, to receive his share, to rejoice in his labor. I mean, this gift of God is a huge handful. It's not just one little, this is
Yeah.
your blessing.
to receive your share, exactly. I mean, you could take that back to the inheritance as well, but it's like, give us this day our daily bread. Whatever it is, we don't just compare it to someone else or want more or whatever. We enjoy. We're able to find satisfaction in that.
I know it may not be connected, but is there a connection with Martha and Mary has chosen the better part? And I remember a whole thing about this part thing. Can you remember that, one of you?
You mean the good portion? She's chosen
The
the good
good portion, yes. There was
Yeah.
a whole thing about that, this
Yeah.
good portion, which was
That's right. Which can be interpreted as eternal life in some contexts, but also I think in that passage, if you tie it into Mishnah Avot 5:13, is it? It
Yeah.
says, it's the wise disciple. And so Mary choosing the good portion, she's like exemplifying a wise disciple.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I think it all kind of comes down to, because he says relax, eat, and celebrate. And all of those are good things. This is what we just read in Ecclesiastes, that you are supposed to eat and drink and relax and celebrate in God. It's not a bad thing to do those things. But I think it all kind of comes down to that last verse in verse 21 of Luke 12. So it is with the one who stores up riches for himself, but is not rich toward God. And so the question becomes, what does it mean to be rich toward God?
Right.
It means to choose the good portion.
Well, and I would say to choose the non-greedy path. To join in, because God is generous. His very nature is generous. And he believes in his own self. He believes in his goodness and his generosity, and that allows him to freely give. And so, like, when we are not greedy, when we're believing and looking to God, we will be like that ourselves. And that allows us actually to truly enjoy what we have. I mean, when we can enjoy the simple things and be generous to other people, I think there's a satisfaction and an enjoyment that comes into life.
Amen.
And then that would be contrasted with this it's kind of like futility, where no matter what you get, you're not satisfied. That really is, it's like a hell, And that's what's described in back to Ecclesiastes 6. Even if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, even if he lives a long, long time, but cannot enjoy his prosperity, even if he were to live forever, I would say a stillborn child is better off than he is.
And
so that kind of reminds me of the Great Divorce.
Following the rich toward God thing, he who is rich toward God sounds maybe like Proverbs 19:17. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. So like being rich to the Lord, lending to the Lord, is when you're kind to the poor, and he will reward them for what they have done.
Yeah. And I'll read this as well, because this is nice, in Ecclesiastes 6, verse 8 and 9. So what advantage does a wise man have over a fool? And what advantage does a pauper gain by knowing how to survive? It is better to be content with what the eyes can see than for one's heart always to crave more. And so we were talking about that in our parable, how the guy's talking to himself in his heart. And there's always this this selfishness of like you want to pack in more for yourself. You're always craving more. This continual longing is futile, like chasing the wind. So I like that.